Well, breaking news on the election front as Georgia has now ordered a full hand recount of every ballot cast during the 2020 election. It's an unprecedented move, but one meant to restore transparency to the voting process. Meanwhile, we continue our series today focusing on the state of Pennsylvania and the challenges that have been made there claiming election fraud. Was there fraud in Pennsylvania? And now reports that 20,000 absentee ballots in Pennsylvania have impossible return dates, and more than 80,000 have return dates that raise questions, according to a researcher's analysis of the state voters database. And is it true that people as old as supposedly 200 years old cast ballots in that election? Actually, it is true. We'll show it to you. I'm Ben Swan, and this is Truth in Media. Hey guys, welcome to the show. A lot to get to today, including a whole slew of election fraud allegations that have been made in the state of Pennsylvania. It is relatively remarkable when you see how many allegations have been made in a state where the margin of victory for Joe Biden right now stands at only 48,000 votes. An incredibly small number when you consider the fact that more than 6 million people voted in the election. So how widespread are these allegations of election fraud? But before we get into all that, including allegations that people as old as 200 years old voted in this election, we want to give a shout out to our sponsor for this episode, Kim Daly, thedailycoach.com. If you've ever thought about being your own boss or being an entrepreneur, you've got to talk to Kim Daly. She is America's #1 franchise consultant, and she can help you to understand what you're looking for in terms of owning your own business. If you've ever thought about owning your own business, maybe you should consider a franchise, because it's not what you might think. It's certainly not just restaurants and bars that fall into the category of franchising. Certainly not just food service. In fact, there are many, many different categories, and Kim can help you to understand that. Her consultation is completely free. She can help to set you on a path to entrepreneurship and franchise ownership. Be sure to check out thedailycoach.com. It is with her help that we are creating this series on election fraud. All right, let's talk about what's happening right now in the state of Pennsylvania, because some pretty remarkable things are taking place there, and a number of challenges have been made. You've probably heard about the biggest one, which is that poll watchers were not allowed to be in a position to really see what was happening during the vote count, specifically in Pennsylvania and in the city of Philadelphia. Now, you've heard these claims before, and now, of course, we hear Democrats saying that Republican poll watchers were allowed in the room. According to Kayleigh McEnany, the White House press secretary and also spokesperson for the Trump campaign on this recount effort, she says it's not so much a matter of whether or not they were allowed in the room, it was whether or not they were allowed meaningful access. Listen to this.
Our poll watchers were put behind barricades in a massive room. They were many feet from the counting process. And in fact, when you look at all of the tables, many hundreds of feet, in fact, from the tables in the very back. They were completely in the dark, completely unable to oversee the vote count, as was their legal right. An observer on the scene described it this way. Imagine being on a football field. You're on the 10-yard line and expected to make a call in the end zone on the other side of the field. It is unacceptable.
The other case that the Trump campaign is making is over the issue of whether or not the same kind of access to things like curing of ballots was allowed uniformly across the state of Pennsylvania. The Trump campaign says it was not. In fact, they say there were one set of rules for some counties that were heavily Democratic and other sets of rules for counties that were heavily Republican. Listen to this.
And finally, a mere survey of the facts shows that voters in blue counties like Philadelphia County were given certain privileges that voters in red counties were not afforded. The Constitution's Equal Protection Clause requires uniform standards, but Democrat election officials created disparities depending on where citizens lived and where they voted in the state. Some counties set up satellite offices for backdoor early voting, whereas other counties did not. Some counties allowed pre-canvassing, where other counties did not. Voters in some counties were allowed to cure their ballots, whereas voters in other counties were not.
So you have all of those issues which need to be investigated, and they absolutely need to be investigated. But then there's also the question of whether or not dead people voted who were ineligible to vote. Now, this is pretty interesting because we did our own research on this issue. According to the Pennsylvania voter registration, at least 2,000 people over the age of 99 years old did cast ballots in this election. Some, though, as old as 220 years old. That's right. Now, these could just be clerical errors that have been made. That's most likely the case. Someone didn't actually fill it out stating that they were born in 1800 or stating that they were born in 1900. However, even if that is the case, the question becomes who filled out these ballots, why were they sent in, and what is the error? Because if you look at the return of where most of these ballots came in so far, of these very old people, over 99 years old, most of them come in Allegheny County, which is around Pittsburgh. It was a stronghold for Biden. And if you look at who these people voted for, they lean heavily towards voting Democrat. And now reports that 20,000 absentee ballots in Pennsylvania have actually impossible return dates, and more than 80,000 have return dates that raise questions, according to a researcher's analysis of the state voters database. Over 51,000 ballots were marked as returned just a day after they were sent out, an extraordinary speed given U.S. Postal Service delivery times, while nearly 35,000 were returned on the same day that they were mailed out. Another more than 23,000 have a return date earlier than the sent date, and more than 9,000 have no sent date at all. The state of Pennsylvania only has a 48,000 vote gap between Trump and Biden, in a state where more than 6,600,000 votes were cast for just those two candidates. So it's remarkable when you look at how slim of a difference there is here and how many allegations of fraud have come up. This is a significant issue. When you begin to go back and audit, if that happens, or canvass that vote, or even toss out ballots, if you toss out 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 ballots, all of a sudden you may have a very different race. Again, this doesn't come down to trying to change the election on Trump's behalf. It does come down to trying to manage the election in a way that provides transparency and clarity for those who voted so that they can have some kind of trust in the election system. It is very possible that in the situation with Pennsylvania, that case will end up going to the U.S. Supreme Court because there's so much going on there and so many issues that have to be resolved. I want to remind you as we do these reports, though, we're doing them not because we're hopeful of one particular outcome over another. We're doing them because we believe that there must be transparency in the process. Transparency for voters who did take the time to go out and make their voice heard. The election belongs to them, whichever way it goes. Americans have to be able to believe that this electoral process works, because if it doesn't, as I've said before, America breaks on this election. Guys, thanks for watching. We'll have an update on these races, plus a look at our next state, Michigan, in an upcoming episode. I'll see you then.